Before you click off this video, I promise you do not need to know what a quantum computer is, how they work. You don't even need to know really what Bitcoin is or how it works or what the word cryptography means. I put non-technical in the title here for a reason. My goal is, no offense to dentists or people in Alabama, but to explain this to a dentist in Alabama or an English teacher in Argentina or Rob Gronkowski, no offense to Gronk, but somebody who maybe not the most experienced computer user, maybe not a computer science degree. Like I put in this title, this video is for basically anybody who owns Bitcoin, is thinking of owning Bitcoin, or hates Bitcoin, but just wants to better understand the topic of how quantum computing may or may not affect Bitcoin in the short run and in the long run. And for everybody who does own Bitcoin or is thinking of owning Bitcoin, some best practices they can use to most securely use Bitcoin and secure their own Bitcoin. So before I get super into the topics, I don't really know how to say this part without sounding full of myself. But if you don't know who I am, my name on the internet is Barry Horse. I'm probably most known for a pretty public track record of beating the baseball and American football betting markets near max liquidity and maturity. Lesser known, but probably more important for this video, I have a degree in computer engineering and computer science. For anybody watching this who knows a little about cryptography, if you've heard of RSA encryption or RSA cryptography, the A in RSA was my cryptography professor in college. I was a daily active Bitcoin Core developer for about 4 years, and I'm very familiar with how the protocol works. And I won't get super nerdy on this part, but I spent 2 years in a lab working on, let's just say, the hardware parts of quantum computing. So I would say I'm relatively qualified to talk about this topic, or at least Bitcoin, the cryptography it does or does not use, and the threats quantum computers might pose to this. One quick disclaimer that I'd like to start these with is, please do not take everything I say in this as gospel. It's really important that people invest and trade on their own conviction. I have never seen, at least in the long run, it work well to have someone make a long-term investment based on borrowed conviction for somebody else. So just because I might say things in this video and I have bet my entire net worth on Bitcoin and way more than that in the form of my reputation, you should not just trust that because I sound smart and have this big, strong opinion, you must listen to me. Everything I'm going to say in this video is something you can research on your own and not something you need to be some PhD computer science student to understand. Basically, two main reasons this won't work in the long run. Number one is, if you don't really understand what I'm talking about in this video, at some point, be it even 5-7 years from now, whatever, you're probably going to see some piece of fear, uncertainty, or doubt about this topic and bother me with some message like, hey, Barry, all these people on the internet are saying quantum computer is going to break Bitcoin. The last 17,000 times they said this, they were all wrong, but this one, it's pretty compelling. And you are going to struggle, I'll be annoyed by that, and then you'll struggle because you will probably panic sell your Bitcoin at the absolute nut low worst time to do that, while I'm busy buying more and ignoring your message. Not to be a dick, but just being honest. So please ultimately make decisions on your own and do your own research, not because everything I say in here is a lie. I promise you it's not. But it's really important to not buy things based on borrowed conviction from some person on the internet you don't know. I'm going to try to structure this video, like I said, in the most simple way possible. If it was really easy to use like 7th grade or even earlier metaphors and analogies to explain these topics to the entire world in one 10-minute video, number one, it would probably exist already. And number two, the price of Bitcoin would not be what it is today at the time of recording this. So in some ways that's a good thing. But I'm gonna try my best. I think I have some ideas that might help. And I guess one note on that is, for the people on this video who are technical, of course, I'm going to gloss over a ton of important details and a ton of really cool, usually elegant math and physics that if you are interested, I'll allude to a little so you can research on your own. But again, this video is for, like I said, a dentist in Alabama. No offense to dentists or the lovely people of Alabama. It's just kind of my random avatar of somebody who, may not be a PhD computer scientist. And so I'll kind of start out with really high level, what Bitcoin is, how it works, what cryptography it does or does not use. And for those who don't even know the word cryptography, basically it's a way of using fancy math to keep a secret from other people on the internet while communicating with others. What a quantum computer is and is not, and what quantum computers may or may not be able to do with the cryptography that Bitcoin uses. And then you should really stick for the very end where I'll kind of summarize everything into a so what, like what is actually going to happen in real life, what's likely to happen or unlikely to happen, a little bit of game theory on how this would really play out in practice. And then for everybody who does already own Bitcoin today, things you can do starting today after watching this video as best practices to make sure you're as secure as you can with your Bitcoin custody. So at a super, super, super high level, there's basically two main layers of cryptography within Bitcoin that matter. Number one is called hashing, and number two is called encryption. So hashing, I'm going to summarize this, and I'm using analogies here that are oversimplifying a lot of more important things, but the best analogy I can use, hashing does what's something called a hash function, which takes some amount of information, could be a picture, a video, a paragraph, a sentence, a word, a single number, and through some seemingly random process, will spit out a astronomically, to humans, unthinkably large number that appears incredibly random with no rhyme or reason to it. And in a way that if somebody, all they saw was this unthinkably large number, they'd have no idea what went into it. You can think of it a little bit, I'm gonna try to really stretch things here. It's a little bit like an extremely intricate, super, like God level blender that you can put 17 random ingredients in, and it's gonna make some smoothie that has nothing to do with the ingredients. So I could put grass, nails, milk, and peanut butter, and it'll make a quick blend on the blender, and it'll make a smoothie that tastes like green apple and carrots. Or I could put green apples and carrots and lemon or whatever, and I'll click blend, and it will make a peanut butter smoothie. One really small part of this analogy would be, it's important that small changes to the ingredients will completely randomize the flavor of the smoothie you make. So if green apples, carrots, and lemons, I think is what I said, creates a peanut butter smoothie, if I change it to green apples, carrots, and instead of half of a lemon of lemon juice, I double the lemon juice, it's no longer going to be a peanut butter smoothie. Maybe it tastes like a blueberry banana chocolate milkshake out of nowhere, where it has nothing to do with the ingredients, and even small tweaks will completely randomize the output. Anybody well-versed on this topic knows I'm making a lot of stretches with the analogies, but that's kind of the best I can do. The way this matters in Bitcoin is in something called Bitcoin mining. Now, I'm not going to make this video in depth on Bitcoin mining. That deserves its own video for another day. But the extent to which you need to understand this for the purpose of this video and quantum computing is Bitcoin mining uses hashes and hash functions so that Bitcoin miners can prove to the world that they have done work. Done work, number one, and number two, spent time. And so Bitcoin is not necessarily married to this specific hash function it uses, called SHA-256. And again, if you don't know what any of these words mean, that's totally fine. You don't need to memorize this. I'm not going to quiz you. But Bitcoin does use this specific hash function. Like if you're watching this video, you've used it today to log in with your password to every single account you've used on the internet today. But Bitcoin is not specifically tied to SHA-256 working. It happens to use SHA-256 because it's the best today. And it's not even necessarily tied to hashing at all working. The whole point of Bitcoin's security protocol and the way we reach consensus every 10 minutes on who owns what is that these miners just have to prove they've done work. Conceptually, Bitcoin as a protocol would work just as it does today if we replaced hashing with miners solving Sudoku puzzles, or maybe just to be even way more dumbed down, crossword puzzles. So a crossword puzzle is relatively quick for people to all verify and see that it's correct. You'll scan through, are these all legitimate English words? Do all the letters match up? Boom, it's a valid response to this crossword puzzle. But it's not something you can just solve in 2 minutes. You have to spend time to think, and a completed crossword puzzle acts as proof that somebody sat down and spent time solving it. And so using that instead of hashing at a protocol level would still allow Bitcoin to work perfectly. That's kind of like the first side of hashing. I'm skipping a lot of important stuff, but we'll get to the quantum side of that in a bit. But that's sort of at the core to how Bitcoin ensures its status as a truth machine, is a really, really intricate design of game theory and incentives where there is no reward without risk. There must be some type of expenditure in the form of time and power, or time and energy. Let's say power is the time derivative of energy, not to get super nerdy. Because ultimately, at the fundamental roots of this universe, there is only two things we will never, ever be able to make more of. That's time, and that's energy, which cannot be created or destroyed. So that's hashing. I'll get into the quantum aspects of that in a bit, but at a cryptography level, that's all you really need to understand there is Bitcoin needs some way of people proving they've done work and coming up with a number that they could not have otherwise come up with without spending a real amount of time and a real amount of energy capital to calculate. On the encryption side, you might have heard of something called public key, private key encryption. If you haven't, that's fine. This is Bitcoin's way of basically signing documents with an unforgeable signature that the whole rest of the world can appreciate as being true or unaltered. So the way Bitcoin works, at, again, a very, very high level, is it's just a book or a ledger or a record or a database, whatever word you want to use, where there's only 21 million Bitcoin, or at least there will be today, a little bit less. And there's theoretically, basically infinite number of people who can use these Bitcoins and send them to one another. And all Bitcoin is just a list of Alice has 10 Bitcoins, Barry Horse has 20 Bitcoins, Charlie has 25 Bitcoins, Daniel has 35 Bitcoins. And every 10 minutes, we, meaning users, exchanges, miners, all participants in the network, just come to agreement and reach consensus on this list of Alice has 10, Barry Horse has 20, Charlie has 30, on and on and on. And anytime somebody wants to transfer some of their Bitcoin to somebody else, they just say, hey world, I know 10 minutes ago, this is Alice speaking, we all agreed I have 10 Bitcoins and we all agreed I have the right to do whatever I want with these 10 Bitcoins. Well, I'm going to prove to you all, I've signed my signature here. I want to send 5 of my Bitcoins to Barry Horse. So please update my number from 10 to 5 and update Barry Horse from 20 to 25. The way we're able to prove that Alice has verified and signed for this transaction is because she can only broadcast this transaction from her public key, her public address that we just 10 minutes ago agreed has 10 Bitcoin. There's only one number that can match with that can sign to the rest of the world that she is okay with this. And this might sound really fragile and weak to people, and I'm not gonna get super in the math of why this is so impossible to break. But human brains really, really struggle with exponentials. So you've probably heard of this example by now if you follow me, but if I spoke with a more average audience, let's say, not to be insulting, and I asked like a random classroom, let's say, if I took a piece of paper and folded it in half 30, 40 times, how far would that thick piece of paper reach? And usually a majority of the class would guess something in the range of here to maybe just off the camera. Let's call it 80%. 10% of the room would see, no, I've tried this before. If you fold a piece of paper in 6 times, it's already pretty thick, something like this. I mean, by the time you get to 30, we'd probably reach to the ceiling, maybe a little above. And 10% of the smart aleck nerd geniuses know that it would reach all the way from here to the moon, over 240,000 miles. And the human brain really struggles with how much doubling matters. Same thing if you've heard of the example with lily pads in a pond, but let's just skip that for people who don't already know about that. And so this number, 2 to the 256, which is all of the cryptography in Bitcoin uses something called 256-bit security or 256-bit cryptography, is such an astronomically, unthinkably large number of possible numbers that I'll try my best to use one example because people never think remotely on this scale. So if you imagine, I'm at the beach right now, if you imagine taking a whole fistful of sand, and if you had to just check one single grain at a time, how long that would take you, honestly, I don't even know. I'm approximating you'd probably get through a whole handful of sand after about a day. Maybe you could carve out like some meaningful amount of a single beach that you're on and could probably dedicate a year to doing that. If you did a real legitimate beach, like I'm from California, like in Malibu, like a real one by Zuma Beach in Malibu where you can just see for a long way in both directions. I mean, you'd be dedicating much more than your lifetime to count up every single grain of sand on its own. Sorry for getting so granular here, not to drop a pun. But if you just imagine all of that added up across all the states, all of the sand underneath water, all of the dust in the air, all of the countries, all in this world, think about how big that number would be and how many human lifetimes you'd have to spend counting up all those grains of sand. And now realize that if you did that for all of the planets in our solar system, all of the solar systems in our galaxy, all of the galaxies in this universe, you'd come up with something like 10 to the 30, 10 to the 32 grains of sand in this entire massive universe that has existed for 14 billion years. Just that alone is never going to be a number any computer, as long as computers are made up of matter, will ever be able to guess and check through. Now, 2 to the 256 is roughly 10 to the 77, 10 to the 78. And so 256-bit security is significantly more secure than if you did that entire grain of sand example and treated each grain of sand as its own universe, which within it then had this grain of sand example embedded within it. 256-bit security is still significantly more robust and a bigger number than that number. And so in Bitcoin, it uses to do this encryption of basically hiding a private, unthinkable, huge number, which is basically like your grain of sand. And that's why, as a quick aside, hopefully anybody who has orange pilled you, or if myself, I am in the process of orange pilling you through this video, or this happens in the future and you still hate Bitcoin after watching this and change your mind inevitably in 3 to 5 or 10 years. Side note, you'd be better off doing it today. Your private keys to your Bitcoin is sort of like your grain of sand, not within our universe, but if each grain of sand in this universe had its own universe that then had all the grains of sand within it. And so that's why it's so important to guard what in Bitcoin ends up being about 24 words. So if there's 2,048 words that these private keys can be made up of, if you have 24 of them, that's 2,048 raised to the 24th power. That's on the order of 10 to the 77, 10 to the 78. That's roughly this 2 to the 256 number. That's why it's so important to guard those 24 words with everything. And that's why that is your grain of sand, and that is what keeps your Bitcoin secure. There's a long-winded way to get around to the encryption that Bitcoin uses for this secret sharing is something called, please don't freak out, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, ECDSA. all the cryptography that you've used to reach this video, if it's on Twitter, YouTube, whatever, you've used some flavor of this. I'm going to skip a lot of the nerdy stuff about how this all works, and especially the elliptic curve stuff. But please, if you are interested, there's great content here on YouTube. But basically, all modern cryptography relies somewhat around it being basically impossible to guess and check one of these grains of sand, A, in the universe, but B, especially if they all had their own universes, and then you had to go into each of those universes and find another grain of sand again. And so that's kind of the root of how Bitcoin secures things, is it's just uncrackable math. I'll get into quantum computing in a bit, but that's the highest level I can on just, again, encryption for keeping your secrets with something called ECDSA, and then hashing for the mining side of Bitcoin using something called SHA-256. I'll get into quantum computing now. Again, you don't need to know what this is. I would hope if you've reached this video, you've probably at some point heard in your life of computers are just sequences of zeros and ones, or maybe you've even heard of semiconductors that can be on or off, 0 or 1. This concept of binary code, or that data in computers is represented with zeros or ones. And if you haven't, no problem at all, but there you have it. If you've tried to understand quantum computing before, it may have been taught to you as, rather than using zeros and ones, quantum computers allow for single bits. A bit is either a 0 or 1. To be represented as many possible states at once using something called a quantum superposition. I promise you this video is not going to get into physics, don't worry. While partially correct, I don't usually love this explanation because it oftentimes makes people think that quantum computers are just these magical physics boxes that just instantly in constant runtime will solve every math problem in the world in 2 seconds because it can calculate everything there ever is to calculate in the snap of a finger. And that's not remotely true. These are not magical physics boxes. And they cannot, do not, and will never replace classical computers. Asking whether you should use one is a little bit like asking what's better, a Lamborghini or a speedboat, or whatever your 2 favorite vehicles are. It depends what you're trying to do and the terrain you're trying to cross. So you could have the greatest Lamborghini in the world, but if I tried to drive that from Los Angeles to Hawaii, I wouldn't make it very far. Same thing if I had the greatest speedboat our species has ever made and tried to drive it from LA to Las Vegas, I would make it nowhere. It depends on the problem you're trying to solve. And so quantum computers exist just to solve some really specific problems. If again, in most practical use cases in the world, these are hypothetical machines. Of course, there is some quantum computing, and to use another famous pun, usually quantum computing is not really a on or off thing. It's to what degree do you have quantum computing? The way computers use something called bits for zeros and ones, quantum computers use something called qubits. And so to practically solve some large problems that humans care about, you need many, 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 many more qubits than anybody in industry or that we can speculate in private have ever put together on a quantum computer today. Now, we should absolutely think adversarially, always assume the worst, and expect that what's happening privately, whether by nation states or private entities, is way more advanced than we could ever think of. And I'm going to do that in this video. But publicly, where we are today is nowhere even like thinkably close to being remotely useful to doing anything with modern cryptography. I just need to get slightly nerdy for this next part. Please don't tune out. I promise you can understand it. The reason I said I don't love the initial most common explanation for quantum computers is that it doesn't instantly solve problems, is that it depends on the problem you're going to solve, how much it speeds up versus a classical computer. And so back to Bitcoin and the 2 main layers of cryptography it uses, which in specific terms is SHA-256 and ECDSA, again, hashing and encryption. There's 2 different solutions towards quantum computers trying to reverse those 2 types of cryptography. So to attack or reverse or break SHA-256, at least publicly, only logical solution to this problem is something called Grover's algorithm, that if you're into this stuff is absolutely worth researching. For everybody who's not, it's actually really, really cool, to be honest. But it's not some magical speed up. All it does in the absolute best case is reduce the runtime of classical computers trying to attack or break SHA-256 from a runtime of, let's say, n to a runtime of square root of n. It's what's called a quadratic speed up in runtime. And so as a quick aside, probably my number one pet peeve in life is how utterly misused the word exponential is across all media. I know a lot of people here in sports, like how often do you hear on ESPN or whatever gambling show you listen to or anything about how this quarterback has just exponentially improved or this team is getting exponentially worse. You hear it almost on a daily basis, and it is so ridiculously misused. It's insane and never mathematically true. And I'm sorry for being such a nerd about it, but something improving quadratically versus exponentially is so different that, like I said before with the folding papers, human brains are just really bad at visualizing and thinking on those levels. But that's the key part, is as far as all of the smartest people in the world and all of academia that understand everything publicly today, there's only one solution towards trying to break SHA-256 with a quantum computer that would be better than a classical computer, and it's Grover's algorithm, and all it does is turn SHA-256 into SHA-128. And so again, back to what this relates to Bitcoin, Bitcoin's just a protocol. It's just a design of, hey, here's a book, here's all these names, they all have Bitcoin balances. Let's find some way to prove they're only getting this through the mining rewards if they work for it and securing it that way. And then let's have some way of them all keeping a secret from each other so that they can use some unforgeable signature when they want to move it. But it's not specifically tied towards SHA-256 working. It's a, sorry about that. I forgot to put do not disturb on the room here. I think I was talking about recipes and how I don't want to get way out over my skis. I know almost nothing about cooking, but this situation's a little bit like Bitcoin's just a recipe for baking a cake. And the recipe calls for using vegetable oil. And right now we're using this brand of vegetable oil. But if you go to the grocery store and it's out of that specific brand, no free ads of vegetable oil, and you have to buy the store brand, you're gonna live. It's still gonna make the cake and it's not gonna make any difference. And really, if somehow the entire world had a vegetable oil shortage, this is where I don't really know enough about cooking. I'm guessing this would work with peanut oil. I might be totally off there, I don't know. But I'm guessing you could use vegetable shortening or something to find some substitute. You just need some amount of some type of fat that's gonna help the stuff bake together. I'm guessing. Again, I'm not the biggest cooking chemist. And so that is just a complete non-issue. And so lots of people think once quantum computers are widely available in the world, Bitcoin mining is going to be completely useless. And it's a complete misunderstanding about all of how Bitcoin works, all of the cryptography it uses, and what quantum computers are. I don't want to be mean, but if you've heard anybody suggest this in a definitive way, you should very likely not listen to them on any of these topics ever again, or at least not until they've ideally apologized and clearly explained how they've learned new things and corrected these, unbelievably stupid opinions they've had. No offense. On the encryption side, this part's a lot more interesting and a lot more threatened, to be completely honest, by quantum computers. So to attack the root of the problem that makes ECDSA strong, the encryption algorithm for Bitcoin, is a math problem called the discrete log problem. It's the same thing that makes RSA encryption secure and most modern encryption systems. Basically, it comes down to, again, guessing really big numbers is really hard and there's no way to do it other than just completely guessing. The interesting thing about quantum computers is one of the world's smartest living humans, Peter Shor, has developed a theoretical algorithm called Shor's algorithm, which relies on something you might have heard of in math class at some point in life called Euclid's algorithm. It's actually really cool if you want to learn about this. I'm not going to teach it in this video. If you are interested, you should check it out, where you basically can make better informed guesses on your next guess when you're doing these guesses and checks for these large numbers. And so Shor's algorithm speeds up the quantum attack of ECDSA and other similar encryption systems from, let's call it a runtime of n to a runtime of log n. And so back to the exponential versus quadratic, this actually is legitimately an exponential speed up, and this does matter, and this does effectively render, again, potentially someday, this could be 200 years from now, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now. Today, we're not remotely close to this happening. It could potentially render ECDSA broken, and to be completely honest, very likely will at some point in the future. Why this is not a threat for Bitcoin is a long, a long message at the end about game theory, but to quickly go over what in the absolute worst case could happen. You might have heard, if you've deeply researched this topic, that like there's a report from Deloitte that's audited this and written some really, really stupid things about this. No offense if you work there, about how about 4 to 5 million Bitcoin are secured in addresses where the world knows the public key, and all they would need is a quantum computer to break ECDSA to be able to spend those 4 to 5 million Bitcoin. What that's missing, and I'll go over even if that did happen, why it's not really a huge issue, but what that analysis is missing is that outside of the first year or so Bitcoin existed, ever since, users and developers of Bitcoin are not stupid people. They've realized that we should do everything we can to make Bitcoin quantum robust in the future. And so all we have used as addresses for the last 15 years or so, at least at the time of recording this video, are hashes of a public key. And so if all you've ever done is receive Bitcoin, either as a mining reward or through payment for a good or service or tip or gift or whatever, or bought it yourself on an exchange and withdrawn to yourself, and you control Bitcoin in an address of your own, if you've never spent it, nobody in the world can see anything about your public key, because what we've done for 15 years is only transact with the hash of a public key. And this goes back to, again, a really key point about SHA-256 and Grover's algorithm, is that it is completely quantum robust. That's not going to break from quantum computers, again, as long as time cannot be bent and computers are made of matter. If those two things change and we just completely reimagine the way we understand physics in 2025 and the way the world has worked for 14 billion years, then things could change. But this is, like, frankly, not to get super nerdy, significantly likelier and safer than betting on gravity continuing, for example. Like, it's much likelier that gravity stops working the way we understand it than anything about SHA-256 being vulnerable. And so really all that's up for grabs are Bitcoins that have been partially sent from addresses from the Genesis block in January of 2009 until I believe October of 2010, which we can forensically analyze to be about 400,000 Bitcoin. It's not a small number at today's prices at the time of recording this video. It's something on the order of $40 to $50 billion. It's certainly not small. But I would like to go over a little bit of game theory, because if you're watching this video, you've probably had some thoughts about this, which is that one thing you do if you have a top secret end boss level secret weapon that can end the world, you usually don't use it until you want to make sure you want to use it and broadcast to the rest of the world that you have this secret weapon. And so for any history fans on here or people who've researched World War II, you may have heard of something called the Coventry Blitz or the Blitz on Coventry. Really quick, for those who know nothing about this, during World War II, the Nazis used their own cipher, sort of like ECDSA, to keep secrets between themselves when communicating, called Enigma. You may have seen, I really recommend it, there's a really good movie about this called Imitation Game, about how Britain and Alan Turing ended up cracking Enigma and approximately saved most estimates on the order of 5 to 10 million lives, shortening the war by cracking Enigma. Alan Turing is very probably one of the 10, maybe most important people ever, but definitely modern people. And one of the most important figures in computing. Definitely recommend watching the movie. They did a pretty good job with it. But one thing that happened after Enigma was cracked was it would be really stupid for them to just instantly broadcast to the Germans that they had cracked their code, because it would be trivial for the Nazis to just switch to a new cipher and have everyone in the war be back to square one. And so when it made sense, Winston Churchill and those in charge made certain decisions to defend themselves against blitzes and secret attacks they had no idea about, if they had a solid excuse for it, like a prisoner of war leaking information or some spy or something that made sense as a story to give. But there's one attack on Coventry where I believe 500 to 1,000 people died. I might be off. It might be more than that. I forget exactly, to be completely honest with you. But they had information that this attack was coming and were forced to let it happen because they had no reasonable excuse for defending themselves against it. And if they defended themselves against it, it would have broadcasted to the Nazis and the rest of the world that Enigma had been cracked. And so while as messed up as this may sound, they had to pay the price of 500 to 1,000 deaths, I believe, for the long game of saving 5 to 10 million lives and shortening the war multiple years by having Enigma cracked for when they really needed it. Long-winded way to say, yes, $40 to $50 billion is a ton of money, but all these quantum attacks really matter is if some small private entity, be it a nation state or some malicious actor, has quantum computing at a significantly higher level than the rest of the world already has. If you have that, you're breaking all modern cryptography in the world, which means you would have all the codes for all of the nuclear submissiles around the planet, all of the communications within nation states and between nation states for the last 50 years, and let's say this happens in 100 years, all this history that's about to unfold in front of us of 100 years, and all kinds of unthinkably valuable things that are worth many trillions of dollars, potentially all the trillions of dollars that exist in the world, which might be 1,000, so like a quadrillion dollars. Maybe more than that, depending on how you argue about all this stuff. And a lot more than 40 to $50 billion. And so if somebody has this, be it a nation state or a malicious actor, the movement of these roughly 400,000 Bitcoins would be the canary in the coal mine. It would be the signal to the rest of the world that ECDSA is cracked. Some private entity has quantum computing well above our wildest dreams, and all cryptography is dead. To use that to steal maybe 40 to $50 billion in today's terms, which admittedly could be $500 billion, maybe more than that, dollars at the time this happens, probably more than that, is not a very smart decision. I'm guessing anybody capable of doing this would be a lot smarter than doing that, especially when considering that if they did do this, they would almost instantly see a decrease in the exchange rate price of those Bitcoins and would cause lots of fear that would then instantly devalue this thing they just stole. So I can't rule that out from happening. I would just logic through the game theory that I think it is extraordinarily unlikely, A, that some private entity ever develops quantum computing that is so many levels above what the entire rest of the world, including all nation states, has, period. And exceedingly more unlikely that if somebody somehow did do that, that they would use it to steal about 400,000 Bitcoin. Even if, let's say, Bitcoin monetizes to half or all of the world's wealth, to steal what's approximately 2.5% of the money in the world for something that would, instantly expose the entire planet to nuclear annihilation doesn't seem like the most logical fear to me. So that's my best explanation for, not to get philosophical, but if your question is, should you worry about quantum computers? My answer to should you worry about blank in anything in life is basically always no. There's either something bad happening or not. If there's not, there's nothing to worry about. If there is something bad happening, there's two options. Option 1 is there's something you can do about it, in which case you should do that thing about it and not worry. Or option 2 is there's nothing you can do about it, in which case you should still not worry. But when it comes to Bitcoin and quantum computing, is there something to be concerned about, let's say, or prepare for? My very strong opinion is absolutely not. And again, once if for whatever reason ECDSA did break, it's completely trivial for the network to fork into some quantum secure cryptography layer, which we already know about today, using lattices and other advanced fancy hand wavy math stuff I'll gloss over for this video. It's really a complete non-factor. I hope these answers didn't come across as condescending, by the way. If you've wondered about this, especially if your background is not technical, you don't know about computers, you don't really know about Bitcoin or cryptography, it's super reasonable. You would want to understand this better. I don't think you're an idiot if you've had fear or uncertainty or doubt about Bitcoin because of this. But I, at least through my understanding of the world and how physics works, would strongly urge you to not have any fear, uncertainty, or doubt about how any of this interplays with Bitcoin. Now, for the time being, is there anything you can do? Yes, just to be extra safe for this 1 in a trillion outcome where some malicious actor somehow has quantum computing at a unthinkably multi-thousand level, way above what the combined rest of the world has come up with, and they somehow want to use that power on stealing 400,000 Bitcoin. One thing you can try to be aware of is to always consolidate your Bitcoin into a single address when it's possible and when it's cheap to do so. So at the time of recording this video, that's extremely cheap to do. I would highly recommend doing that for many reasons. And number 2 is use a good or smart wallet software. Or if you're doing this yourself, make sure that when you send Bitcoin, let's say you have an address that stores 10 Bitcoin and you want to send 5 to Alice, make sure that you're also spending that other 5 to a new one so that you're never partially sending Bitcoins from an address, and that all the Bitcoins you control are on addresses that have never spent Bitcoin before. If you want to be extra paranoid and, an A-tier secure user of Bitcoin, that would be the smartest thing to do. Though again, for everything I just explained in this video, it's really not something anybody needs to be concerned about. So I hope this has been helpful. It probably turned out longer than I or you were expecting, but I did want to cover this in as general terms as I can. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'd like to make more of these in the future. If baseball dies down, we might, I'm frankly a lot more concerned on some other stuff with work like that right now. But the most fun thing I do definitely is this part of Bitcoin education. And so if and when I have time, I will do more. And for everybody who somehow made it this far, I really do appreciate it. If you want to help me at all, I'm obviously doing this because I think it can help people and see eyeballs. So if you think this is helpful, or you have a friend who has wondered about this or asked you about this, if you could send them this video, I would appreciate that. I know it's not a small ask. Like if you're, not that you'd be like vouching for me or anything, but if you are kind of recommending me to somebody else, you are putting your name somewhat on me knowing what I'm talking about. So I don't take that as a small ask, but that is my ask if you enjoyed this video and thought it was helpful or educational at all. So wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, week, life, whatever. And thank you for making it this far, and hope this was as helpful as I meant it to be. Take care.